I'd like to call the 5 March meeting of the Manhattan City Council to order. And please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, we're fortunate enough to have tonight 2 proclamations, and we'll start with the first one. So if Mary, and Marlene will join me, please, at the front. This will be for International Women's Day.
In 1911, International Women's Day was first honored in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland when more than 1 million women and men attended rallies campaigning for women's rights to work, vote, be trained, hold public office, and for an end to gender discrimination. In 1977, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution calling on member states to proclaim a day for women's rights and international peace, and following the nation's lead, each year, the U.S. President issues a proclamation calling on all citizens to observe March as National Women's History Month, as well as a separate proclamation on International Women's Day, March 8th. This past year, our country saw the rise of powerful movements that shine the light where women's rights and freedoms still fall short. International Women's Day is a day to celebrate the collective power of women, uphold women's achievements, recognize challenges, focus greater attention on women's rights and gender equality, encourage and mobilize all people to do their part to bring about positive change. Now, therefore, I, Michael L. Dotson, Mayor of the City of Manhattan, Kansas, do hereby proclaim Friday, March 8th, 2019, as International Women's Day in the City of Manhattan to hashtag balance for better, motivating and uniting friends, colleagues, and the community to think, act, and accelerate gender parity.
Just like to mention that tomorrow night or Thursday evening at the Holiday Inn, we'll have a forum, open forum to the community if they'd care to join. We will have 4 panelists, and I'll let my partner Mary Nanga introduce those 4 women who will be sharing their experience here in this country as citizens, former citizens of another country. Thank you for the proclamation.
So March 7th, we will have a mixture of K-State faculty, alum, and students featured as speakers from Armenia, Brazil, Iran, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Dr. Caldas from Brazil, Kachatran from Armenia, Kisangani from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Oranji Far from Iran. Thank you.
We're having
On March 22, 1972, President Richard Nixon signed into law a measure that amended the Older Americans Act of 1965 and established a national nutrition program for seniors 60 years and older. The March for Meals campaign was established in March 2002 to recognize the historic month, the importance of the Older Americans Act nutrition programs, both meals served in senior centers and delivered to the homes of elders, and to raise awareness about the escalating problem of senior hunger in America. The 2019 observance celebrates 17 years of providing opportunities to support older Americans by donating, volunteering, and raising awareness about senior hunger and isolation. In 2018, Friendship Meals served at the Raleigh County Seniors Service Center delivered 21,008 meals to homes of seniors in Manhattan and served another 11,261 meals at the Raleigh County Seniors Service Center for a total of 32,269 meals to 510 people. The Friendship Meals program has served our communities admirably for more than 40 years in Kansas and Manhattan. Now therefore I, Michael L. Dodson, Mayor of the Manhattan, Kansas, do hereby proclaim March 2019 as March for Meals Month and urge every citizen to take this month to honor our Friendship Meals programs, the seniors and caregivers they serve, and the volunteers who care for them.
Thank you. And I know many of us on the commission have worked with the Senior Service Center and helped Jamie wherever we could. And she's done a marvelous job down there. To see the people coming in to have that meal is very rewarding. I know they deeply appreciate it. We've also had, when we're remodeling the kitchen, I mean, they went to extra effort to reach out into the community to have places to prepare and serve the meal. So a lot of effort went into that. They appreciate it. Say a few words.
Mayor Dodson, thank you very much for your kind words. We serve about 126 homebound people every single day from the Riley County Senior Center. We could not do that without the partnership of the City of Manhattan, which provides a great deal of support for the Senior Center, and also just this event tonight helps make people aware of our need for volunteers. Our volunteers, when they go out to a home of a homebound senior, not only deliver a meal, but they deliver a friendly knock on the door. It may be the only person that person who we're delivering to sees for that entire day. There have been many times when someone delivering has stumbled upon or happened upon a situation where we actually saved a life because when we knocked, no one answered. So this provides a great deal of support not only for those seniors, but the people who are caring for them. It gives them peace of mind. And because we serve people who are maybe not able to pay for their meal, it's by voluntary contribution at the Senior Center if you're age 60 or older. We help alleviate senior hunger within the City of Manhattan, and we're grateful for the partnership to do that as well at the center. Thank you, Mayor Dodson, for this opportunity.
I would just point out that we tend to think of Manhattan as having a young population, and we do. But about a little over 10% of the population in Manhattan is over age 60. And so there's a population there that you might know when it's time, but when you want to go to the senior center, or if you are recovering from surgery or ill and you need what we kind of call Meals on Wheels delivered to you. And so this is an effort just to highlight that activity that we don't hear a lot about. So thank you all, and thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Karen.
enter the public comment period. So this is an opportunity for anybody in the public to come forth and state your opinion or make a request of any kind you'd like. These are items not on the agenda. So at this time, I just ask for anyone that wants to come up and speak to come forward. And we've got a timer that is set at 4 minutes and 30 seconds for a warning, and then 30 more seconds. So anybody who'd like to come forward, please do so. All right. Seeing no one, we'll move to Section 4, which is Commissioner comments, and I'd call on all the commissioners to make comments if they so choose.
It's pretty far away. I would just like to mention that I represent the City Commission on the Flint Hills Regional Council, and that's a 7-county jurisdiction area with a representative of each local governing body that comes together. The Flint Hills Regional Council obtained some sponsorship money from the EPA to identify what contaminated sites. They're called brownfields. So we're currently in the process of identifying those locations, and we have through about the middle of March, and then we will set about prioritizing them as to which ones we should advance and go try to get some funding from the state or the federal government to remediate those sites. So you might be aware of a former gas station or a dry cleaning site that is currently just sitting there empty because we can't allow anyone to build on it. And so this would clean up that site and put that property back on the tax rolls. And so it is a worthy project, and I just wanted to make an announcement about that. So if you're aware of any sites, this is a good time to come forward. And you can contact the city manager's office just for more information, or Google Flint Hills Regional Council and find the nominating form for the project. Thank you.
I just wanted to take a second and acknowledge yesterday we lost a pretty prominent Kansan, Stephanie Mott, who was an LGBT advocate here in Kansas, very prominent figure, and it was very unexpected, her passing. And I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge her because she was just such a huge figure in our community in Kansas. She's been working on LGBT rights issues for decades now. And I just wanted to read the last paragraph. Equality Kansas made a statement about her passing, and I just wanted to read the last paragraph of it. It said, "Stephanie served unselfishly, often putting the needs of Kansas LGBT community ahead of her own. We can't find adequate words to express our grief at her passing, but we'll find solace in knowledge that her life and her work will make Kansas a better place for future generations." A lot of the major newspapers that covered her passing were able to find quotes from previous interviews that they've done with her in the past, and so it's just a huge loss for us, and her work meant a lot. I probably wouldn't be sitting in this chair today if it wasn't for people like her, so I just wanted to take a second and acknowledge her. So yeah.
Yeah, this past Sunday, they had the 8th Annual Constitution Bee, which has been conducted in Manhattan for 8 years. It's called Yes for Liberty. You can donate on their website. And there were 27 finalists, high school students from across the state of Kansas. And there were 3 winners, Mark McAllister from Wisdom Academy, and Carson Cargill from Medicine Lodge High School, and Rita Archer from St. Mary's Academy. And they were awarded, $3,000, $1,500, and $750 scholarships. So that's a very good program that's been going on for years. They're planning on having it, for the 9th year, next year. So if you're interested in contributing, because that's all through donations, please take a look at the Yes for Liberty website.
Okay. The proclamation was just given to AAUW for International Women's Day for Thursday. I just wanted to say the public forum is open at 7 o'clock at the Holiday Inn on campus, 7 p.m. There is a breakfast for some female leaders in our community that morning also, and there's a dinner at 6, but I think that's already closed out. So if you are interested in hearing our 4 panelists, please come at 7 o'clock to the Holiday Inn on campus this Thursday evening. Spring break is next week. It's hard to imagine that's here. I hope it's nice and sunny or a little bit warmer. But on March 10th, Sunday is daylight savings. So it's spring, so I don't remember if you go forward. So it's faster than I thought. I didn't realize it was here so soon. Also next week, from Sunday through Wednesday, 3 of us will be at the National League of Cities, meeting with legislators and also being at a lot of roundtable discussions on what cities are doing well and what our challenges are and how to do things a little better for our taxpayers and our citizens here. So we will be out for most of next week, but hopefully we'll come back with some wonderful, innovative ideas or some things that we can do better in our own community.
Just a couple of quick things. I want to acknowledge the great work of our street department. For somehow the schedule has been that we get snow every weekend, so these folks have been working pretty hard to keep our streets clean. Of course, immediately after we have the snow and the cold, then it warms right up, so then it turns over to the street department again, who has to do all the patching. And I think the street department has now found a better cold mix that we can put in these potholes. It seems to be playing out pretty well. I guess we'll continue to do a little testing before we do the big buy, but so far this new mix seems to be working pretty well, and you don't have to completely dry the hole out before you do the patch, so that's saves us a little time as well. I also like to thank the fire department and the police department for the work that they did during Fake St. Patty's. Given that it was pretty doggone cold, some of us went down there on Friday night and then again on Saturday. Spirits were high, but people were cold, and I think they stayed inside, and the work that they did in Aggieville Business Association to kind of begin to make some changes in coordination with the police department and the fire department were positive. We found a few things that perhaps didn't work the way we thought they were just because it was so cold. But I think the trend is in the right direction. We're trying to get a lot of the young people into Aggieville to do other activities rather than binge drinking. And so we've got to continue to push in that direction. But this outcome, I think, was pretty good. So appreciate all the hard work that went into the planning for that. With that, we'll move to the consent agenda. This is item 5. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the consent agenda are those items that the commission has previously considered, or they're administrative or housekeeping in nature. So if anyone has a comment on any item on the consent agenda, we'd ask you to come forward and let us know what you're thinking on that. There'll certainly be some time on the discussion points as well, but on these consent agenda items, any commissioner has the ability to flag one of those and to have further discussion and normally move it to the end of the consent agenda items. So anyone wishing to speak on the consent agenda, please come forward. Okay, seeing no one, any discussion by the commission on the agenda, the consent agenda?
Yes, as you mentioned, I'd like to flag item H and move it to the end.
Okay.
And that's the item on the school board waiver of building fees.
Okay.
I'd just like to call attention to item F, which is the Wildcat Creek Watershed 2D flood model. And Wynn Butler and I have served on the selection committee to identify a consultant to help us with the right touch and the right mitigation to slow down the water, do whatever it takes, whether it's a detention pond, whatever it may be, along the route of that creek, so it stops impacting. And I don't know that we can ever get to total stopping the water, but we just have to, and I'm really glad that we're moving this quickly. So we are about 6 months after the flood, and we've already selected this consultant. So I'm encouraged that we will have a top list of 10 things that we can do that will really make a difference. So I just wanted to call attention to that.
And when you wanted to move that to the end of the general agenda? Okay.
So
The motion will be amended to move item H to the end of the general agenda too.
Right.
I just wanted to see if Ron can explain a little bit about E. We're having a public hearing on March 19th to levy special assessments against Miller Park and the Scenic Drive intersection improvements, just so public knows what we are having a public hearing on.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Reddy. This is an item that was part of a grouping of special assessment items that you held a public hearing on at the last meeting. And we discovered that there was an error in this particular subdivision allocation, and so we need to start over on this particular assessment for this for these projects, this street project associated with Miller Parkway and Scenic Drive. And so we're re-noticing all of the folks that were impacted by this error, and we'll have a new public hearing just specifically for this item, and then we'll follow on with that. So it really dealt with the error was of the nature of there were changes to some of the lots from when it was originally calculated, and so it didn't get spread correctly over the lots. And so we've corrected that, and we're re-noticing folks about that error.
With that, I would like to move, make a motion to move, to approve the consent agenda with item H to the end of the consent, to the general agenda.
second.
Call the roll, please.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse.
Yes.
Motion carries.
We'll now move to item number 6, which is the general agenda. And the first item is to consider benefit district petitions and resolutions regarding stormwater, sanitary sewer, street and water improvements for Stonehaven Addition Unit 2. And Brian Johnson will be presenting.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Brian Johnson, City Engineer. So the item tonight is Stonehaven Addition Unit 2. If you recall, we've had 3 discussions on this in the last 6 months. The first discussion back in October was a direction to staff and to the developer as far as a potential land transfer in the future for tracks, what we're calling A, B, and C, and I've got a map of those for you later. The discussion then in December was a development agreement, and that agreement set forth how the petitions would be assessed between all the properties, and then also laid out 4 contingencies that the developer had to submit to the city before we would proceed to construction. 2 of those items, petitions and a certification for the dam that's on the site, have been accomplished, and we're going to talk about those a little bit tonight. The other 2, the developer can't submit until final plans. They're permitting through the state, and we have to have final plans for those. So after petitions tonight, then the developer will go to final plans and then submit for those last 2 pieces of contingencies. So with that, got a little bit of background information, and I know it's not that old, it's only 6 months, but I wanted to just refresh everybody's memory. The City Commission approved the development agreement back in December of 2018. 4 contingencies were part of that agreement. 2 have been completed. The first one is submit petitions to the Commission for approval and review. That's tonight. Also obtain Kansas Department of Agriculture permit for the dam. That's been completed. We've got the paperwork back from the Kansas Department of Ag. There's some comments in there that need to be addressed during construction, but those can be solved pretty easily. Actually, we have the permit in hand. There's 2 remaining contingencies yet to be done. One is to obtain permits prior to construction. So a notice of intent, you can't obtain that from Kansas Department of Health and Environment until plans are complete. You submit that at completion of plans. And then also KDHE permits for the water and the sewer main. Again, those can't be submitted until plans are complete. In the contingencies, the contractor was not going to move forward with construction until we had those. So there is some contingencies in that agreement that details when they can and can't go to construction. We don't issue a notice to proceed until we have those. Then the second item was they were going to dedicate park tracks A, B, and C to the city prior to construction. Again, they don't get a notice to proceed until that takes place. So with that, let's look at the overall master plan, because changed a little bit and we want to go over that. So everything in the purple is in the PUD, which was in the Unit 2 plat. Specifically, this lot and this lot are part of the AmeriCare lot, and that's partially what's driving the petitions for tonight. AmeriCare is getting very close to having plans done, submitting for a building permit. That permit and that building is going to be about a $15 million building. So when you scale that to what the petitions are tonight, the petitions tonight are about $7 million. So it's a 2-to-1 return on that investment. I know we've talked in the past a lot about the risk for the city in petitions is when there's nothing built on the property. There's going to be something on that property by the end of 2020. Construction will start this year. Then this is townhome residential. Again, tracks A, tracks B, track C. The green tracks here are eventually going to come to the city. Those are the tracks that we've talked about. The 15 acres that are park ground will eventually be dedicated back to the city. Then you've got a future residential out here in yellow, single family residential. I believe there's about 29, 30 lots in that. And then you've got the business park I-5 up here. Been through this plat for quite a while now. I'm sure you're very well versed in this. So we're going to talk about each project specifically. So the first project is the Amherst Avenue storm sewer and grading. If you go back to the master plan, this project runs from about here to here. That's what this map entails. This is the project that would extend Amherst from the future roundabout, which is another project, all the way down to where the crossroads to the dam and to Stonehaven Drive are. This project does all of the grading. It puts storm sewer in the ground. That storm sewer collects all of the storm water from up here, carries it down south of the Track B pond, which is the pond that we're trying to keep clean. That's the amenity in this park. And then it dumps that stormwater down here to a detention pond. And there's a separate detention pond project coming up later. So this is that detention pond, tract A. Again, all the stormwater bypasses the clear pond, comes down, dumps into the big detention pond down here. This is where we settle all the we filter all the sediment out. We get all the nitrogen, phosphorus, all of the silt coming off of all of the future yards and gardens up here. Comes down here, filters it all out, detains it so that our pre and post detention are equal or less. In this case, we're actually decreasing that amount of runoff or that rate of runoff. And then we discharge it down, and it goes down over here to the Kansas River. Part of this project also paves this road over the top of the dam, which also functions as the emergency spillway. There's also a short trail and a path down through here, and then a little parking area here. So at some point in the future, this will be our parking area. People can come and get here, walk down the trails, walk up over the dam, go walk through the park, come through here. This is the primary parking spot that's going to create. Track C is the stormwater quality. So there's a few lots here that drain down into this upstream of the big pond. Water comes down here, we filter it out, we get all the phosphorus, nitrates out of it so we don't get a lot of algae in our pond. Gets all of the mud and silt out of it too. This is what's called a BMP, or Best Management Practices pond. It's what would be called a forebay, or it collects all of that sediment in the upstream pond so that this pond here stays clean. This is the roundabout at Miller Parkway in Amherst. This project takes that existing intersection, which is a 4-way intersection with turn lanes, builds a single and dual lane roundabout. at this intersection. There are no right-of-way or easement issues at this intersection. Traffic would come, flow through the roundabout, go one way or the other. We also have all of the crossings located in here. That's the dash lines you see. Amherst Avenue, the actual paving of the street. So this project paves Amherst Avenue 37 feet wide, so very similar to Miller Parkway, where you have bike lanes on both sides. You've got the 31-foot street, so you got plenty of access in and out. Gives you a center turn lane, so when we build a driveway over here for the park, or build a driveway over here for the park, or we want to have a pull over here, we have that third lane to get people out of that through lane. This is the sanitary sewer project, and this collects all the sanitary sewer, brings it down to a lift station, and you'll see that lift station in another petition over here, and then that lift station then pumps it up and over Miller Parkway, where it goes down into East Miller Ranch sanitary sewer interceptor. We can't take the sanitary sewer down down towards the Kansas River and down K-18 because KDOT won't let us on their right-of-way, so we have to build a lift station to pump it up the other way.
Brian, wait a minute.
Yes.
About the lift station. It says in the materials that it will include removal and repurposing of the existing lift station.
Yes.
So you're taking one out and putting in a new one, a bigger one, or you're putting it in somewhere else?
So the next slide is actually
Yeah.
the lift station
Okay.
slide. We want to try to reuse as much of that existing lift station as we can. We are going to move it. Our hope and our intent is that we can reuse some pumps and some other gears and
Sure.
some communication equipment that
Yeah.
we can reuse. We don't know that yet for a fact.
Okay.
We need to do some engineering on it.
Okay.
And
See
through the
what's-
petition process, we'll start that.
It did speak maybe to moving the pump somewhere else.
The pumps may move slightly farther
Yeah.
north so that we can
Okay.
pick up more area. Again, we haven't gotten into those exact details.
Okay, so when you get into, it's going to require getting into it before you know what.
Absolutely,
What the
yes.
answer is.
Yes,
Okay.
as part of the design for this, we actually have a requirement of the developer and of the engineer to do an analysis on that lift station.
So we aren't having to buy a new one. Okay.
That's the goal,
Thank
is
you.
to
Good.
repurpose as much of that equipment as we can. It's not
Yeah.
very old, it's in pretty good shape.
Okay,
If we don't use it here, we'll use it somewhere else.
Okay.
We repurpose these quite a bit. We actually have several throughout the city that we've repurposed.
okay, thanks.
So this is the lift station project. Again, the lift station sets over here. We'll pump it up and over and to the north of the roundabout where it gets into the East Miller Ranch Interceptor project, which is about 10 years old, carries a very large amount of wastewater, actually everything from the Eureka Valley over to Wildcat Creek Lift Station. This is the water line project. Again, we connect to the 12-inch that's in Miller Parkway, goes over to the tower, which sits over here. We come down the road, install 8-inch water main down to the new, where the new dam is. So what that allows us to do, provides water service to the park, to all 3 tracks. It also allows us to provide sanitary sewer service to all 3 tracks also, which at some point in the future, as those parks develop, just like Annenberg, it's nice to have a restroom and some facilities there, especially if you're there, you know, with little kids and they're playing soccer and they need to use the restroom or whatever. Cost shares, so this is the cost shares for those petitions. Later on in the presentation, I have some slides that talk about the cost share policy that was adopted in 2012. These follow that policy exactly. So the Amherst Storm Sewer and Grading Project, at 6.7% city at large, which is that extra width of that street from 31 to 37 feet. Also includes the dual sidewalks on both sides, much like Miller Parkway. The detention pond is 100% developer. BMP Stormwater is 100% developer. The Amherst Avenue Sanitary Sewer, 100% benefit district. Lift station, again, 100% benefit district. The big city at large is the Amherst Miller Parkway roundabout. Again, it's because we oversized from those existing turning lanes to a roundabout. So the developer is required, as we discussed in December, to pay for that base project, which includes all the turn lanes for westbound, eastbound Miller Parkway and northbound, southbound Amherst. The city picks up everything over that cost. Amherst Avenue Street Extension, which is the actual street of Amherst, again, picking up sidewalks and the over width, total of a 17% additional city at large. And then the water line is 100% benefit district. So again, 0 cost for the city on that. So the special assessments to all of the lots. You go down through the lots, lot 29 is the big, so this is lot 29. That will be subdivided later, and those specials will be cast upon all of those properties later when they come in for a phase 2. Our tract B, which is that city park tract, has an assessment of about $850,000. That'd be about $62,000 on an annual payment over a 20-year mortgage or a 20-year payment period. About 0.12 mils with first payment about 2024. Again, and what I tell everybody, whether I'm at somebody's kitchen table or whether I'm talking to you, petitions set a maximum value. These values cannot be higher than this. That $62,000 is a maximum payment. It's very likely through the construction and bidding process, those numbers will be lower. Perfect example was the Miller Parkway that we're assessing now. Those costs were about 20% lower than we originally budgeted back in 2012. Through the design process, we'll certainly try to get that number down as far as we can, but again, a petition sets a maximum amount. They can be lower, but they cannot be higher.
Did it go up since the last time we talked about it, though?
It did go up a little bit, and it's because of the questions with the lift station. We're not positive about that lift station, comfortable enough to say for sure what that lift station is going to be. So it's gone up a little bit for that. It's gone up a little bit for the roundabout, and then of course all of the financing fees are included in that 852.
First time we talked about it, it was 600.
657, I think, was the number we were looking at. Again, that 852 includes all of the financing, which is about 10 to 15%. So that would also include that number also. If you do look though, our 852 compared to our 5.7, so the city is about a 14%, 13% stakeholder in this entire process. The developer is in it to about 87%. So that kind of gives you a scale of what each share is. So then there's a city at large portion. The city at large share estimated at about 6.7% for the storm sewer and grading, which was in that earlier slide. The piece that's associated with the Amherst Avenue extension, which is widening the street, adding both sidewalks on both sides, that's about a 17% number. The construction design with the Miller Parkway roundabout is about a 62% city at large. Again, that's the difference between building the turn lanes and building the roundabout. That's why that number is so high. Total city at large is about $1.3 million, which would be about 0.16 mils on a $100,000 payment per year, annual payment starting at about 2024. Of that 1.3 million, roughly 700,000 or so was related to that roundabout upsize. Again, going back to December, our concern was we're better off using those dollars that the developer is going to use for the turn lanes rather than coming back in 5 or 10 years and putting some signals up there, because that signal cost is probably $300,000 to $350,000, so about half of what that upsize on that roundabout would be. Our concern was later on we'd be spending money on top of money. So when we talk about the size of that park and those 15 acres, tried to give a visual here of what that looks like. If we took that park at Stonehaven and overlaid it on Annenberg Park, you can see it dwarfs Dishman Lake, substantially larger, roughly about a third or quarter of the size of Annenberg Park. So it's a pretty large area when we talk about 15 acres. And I know that's hard to visualize, you know, based on that first map. It's hard to visualize what that is. So I tried to take that, overlay it on Annenberg Park just to give us an idea of the vastness of that property and how big it is. So that's what it would look like if we laid it upon Annenberg Park. And then also back in December, we talked quite a bit about the Stonehaven piece and how it's really the keystone to the Warner Park, VMI tract, Scenic Meadows, Park at Lee Mill Heights, the Ledgestone Park, and the Annenberg Park. This is really the piece that connects all of those dots so that somebody can start in Warner Park, go down the trail over to VMI, up to Lee Mill, through Scenic Meadows, Ledgestone, and then back to Annenberg. This is kind of that final piece in that big puzzle that we've been trying to solve for 5 years or so now, 6 years, as we look to that southwest quadrant of the city and how do we connect all of those dots. This is that final piece. And so with that, I would stand for questions, or the developer or the engineering firms here also.
Can you just say something real quickly about the roundabout? I may have missed it, but it's a single lane roundabout, but it's similar in size to what?
It's similar size to 4th and Bluemont.
Yeah.
So it's actually east-westbound would be equivalent to a dual lane roundabout. We're gonna stripe it as single lane so that we've got some outside, we've got some swinging radius for semis, but it's the same size as 4th Bluemont, which is a double roundabout.
Thanks.
I do have a question, Brian. In the materials about the roundabout, it says these improvements exclude construction of items that are above and beyond what is required to construct a functional roundabout, including but not limited to decorative lights, artwork, fountains, and sculptures. So is there not going to be any light at all at that roundabout?
No, we would light it through our standard city lighting policy. That statement was more if we want something decorative or if we want some sort of art in the center of it. These costs don't include that, and we'd have to come back at a later date and add that.
So
There will be, go ahead.
What does the city plan to put in the roundabout? Grass?
Right now, it would be grass.
Stone or grass, rocks or grass or?
Right now, we're planning on grass, you know,
Okay.
with some curb islands, very similar to how Kimball and Anderson looks.
Okay.
Before Blueville came in and did all that
Or landscaping.
Remember, we had an agreement with them where they were to supply that landscaping. We can certainly come back to the commission at some point in the future and talk about what needs to be in there. Right now, for these petitions, it's based on just not doing any artwork.
What is the grade there with regard to the roundabout? Will you, seems to me that, so you're gonna have to add some soil because just on the south side of that roundabout, it would go downhill. So would anything in the middle of the roundabout be an issue with regard to being able to see other traffic or?
So Miller Parkway is at the top of the hill,
Yeah.
watersheds both ways.
Right.
And because it's at the top of the hill, it's relatively flat. That south side, it does, I agree,
Yeah.
it does tip down a little bit. There'll be a little bit of fill on that south side, but nothing extreme. It'd be very similar to Kimball and Anderson, how that one's tilted a little bit to the south.
I appreciate your comments, thanks.
No, I don't have too many comments, except I appreciate the detail that you went into with the diagrams as well as the text.
That was Bernie's staff.
Okay. I know that
Finance
must have
staff
taken a
really-
lot of time to do that.
Yeah, they worked hard on this, and I appreciate all their help.
Yeah, because it really made it comprehensive and easier to understand. Although the numbers are not great as far as financing from
Yeah.
the city side, when we think about benefit districts and developing that entire area, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a decade
I would
or
agree.
more at least for all of that to
Yeah.
develop. But I think putting some of these things in place is important right now. And even to get here, it took us over a decade.
It took us a while, yes. This front portion, I would, you know, with the AmeriCare starting within the next few months, I think that'll really kick off this front portion. The residential, you know, that's as demand happens. The stuff just to the west in the Grand Bluffs, that's taken off pretty well. I mean, that's been a pretty nice area. There's quite a few houses up there. I would assume this would be similar just based on geography and where it is in the city, but I'm not a realtor.
Right. And I like the idea of it can't go higher than this.
Yes.
That at least sets the boundary, the maximum.
That's the top, yes.
Yeah.
And that's very important in benefit districts, and not a lot of people understand that. And I have to explain that a lot, that is the cap, that is
Right.
it. If we go over that, we're back before U5.
And last night I was listening to the planning board meeting about the comprehensive plan and reviewing it. Is there anything on here that needs to be added to that, like the VMI track? We were talking about that, Commissioner Morris and I, because I don't think that was in play when we were thinking about the comprehensive plan in 2015 or whenever it was. Is that
Well,
something that needs to be revised or added to the comp plan as we go forward?
I guess I'll defer to Eric on the VMI track. What I can tell you is we've sent everything to KDOT to get to own that tract. We should be seeing that quitclaim deed shortly from them. I think within the next 30 days or so, we're going to own that piece of property.
That's good to know.
So the 2015 comprehensive plan shows the VMI tract as a park.
It does,
Yeah,
okay.
it does.
Okay. And it's under our ownership, and I did not see
Well,
that.
it doesn't talk about ownership, it's talking about land use.
Okay. I didn't even realize it had it as a park already, doesn't it?
I didn't
as a
either.
park? So
That's
it
why I
was
had to defer to
Dead
Eric.
land is what I thought it was. Okay, well, thank you, Eric.
We
I
should be
appreciate
getting a
it.
quick claim deed shortly. We sent it to them about 2 to 3 weeks ago.
Okay, well, thank you, I appreciate this.
All right, I asked for a public comment at this time. Anyone wishing to comment on this item under the general agenda, please come on forward. Thanks, Neil.
Commissioners, my name's Neil Horton. I'm representing BCC Development this evening, and so we are happy we've gotten to this point. We are anxious to get started. As Brian related, been in contact with AmeriCare. They would like to get their plans in front of your officials here and get some approval process started, and they would like to get going later on this summer too, which means we need to get going here pretty quick. So I'm certainly encouraging you to approve this tonight so that we can begin that design process and get started here in the second quarter of this year. I don't really have anything else to add. I thought Brian did a pretty good job of going through it there, and so I would just stand for any questions if you'd like.
I think we're good. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Neil.
Okay.
Any other public comment, please? All right, seeing none, we'll come back to the commission.
I just want to make a quick comment before we move on this. The last time we talked about this, I wasn't particularly thrilled about the $600,000 that we were going to take on in special assessments. I still don't really like it that much, but Mr. Briggs has convinced me of the value of the land. He took some time out of his day with me, and we went out and looked at it, and I do think there's value there. I still have hesitations about how developers could potentially abuse this process in the future. I buy a development, I buy a large plot of land next to it, knowing that we're going to assess the specials by square footage. I can just come to the city and say, I want to donate this as a park, and I have yet to be on, we don't say no to parks. We don't say no to land, we always take it on. And I don't know if this scenario would have worked out the same way if we didn't have special assessments and this was financed how most developments in other cities are financed, and they came to us and said, we'll sell you this piece of land for $800,000. I don't think that we would have done that. But we're still going to end up paying for it. It's just the difference is we're bonding it out and paying for it as debt. So I'm convinced in this scenario, it is the right thing to do. I'm really cautious about how this gets applied to future developments, and I also think that we have to bear in mind that at the end of the day, we're still paying $600,000 to $800,000 on this piece of land, period. Especially when we're going to negotiate something that's a $200,000 cost later today. We have to bear in mind that this is a significant expense.
Yeah, but the expense also covers it takes care of some stormwater issues, which I think, is value added. We'd had to pay for that anyway if we didn't do it. And we don't always approve all. If you remember, a developer tried to give us 3 or 4 tracts of land just a few weeks ago, and we just took the parts that fit into our park plan, and we didn't approve a couple of tracts there that didn't make sense to us. So it's not always a universal thing.
I would just like to say that I'm pleased that we're able to work with the developer on this project. It's a natural, forward-looking effort to develop onto this property, and as our comprehensive plan would indicate, it was expected and has been expected for some time. It sometimes just is a matter of time before you can put a package like this together. And I know that earlier, a year or so ago, the commission wasn't, and the neighborhood was resistant. And so I'm pleased that this is a proposal that we can accept, and there's not a room full of people here. It's a reasonable way to go forward. And so thank you very much for the work you've done and working with our city staff.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I move that we find the petition sufficient and approve resolutions number 030519-A through H for Stonehaven Addition, Unit 2 improvements SM 1902-1904, ST 1903-1904, SS 1914-1915, and WA 1914. As recommended findings, the project's advisable and authorizing construction.
I'll second it.
Let's call the roll.
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move to a second item, which is to consider the first reading of an ordinance amending Article 4, Section 4-203C3, Aggieville Business District of the Manhattan zoning regulations. And this Ben will be presenting.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Ben Schmiel. I'm a planner for the City of Manhattan. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this item first. As you're well aware, the Aggieville Community Vision Plan, it was a planning document that was adopted by this body back in April of 2017, almost 2 years ago. It covers a lot of different topics related to Aggieville. It goes into things like land use, what we want the mixture of uses in Aggieville to be. It talks about economic viability, sense of place, identity of Aggieville as an icon of the city. It talks about preservation of certain areas of Aggieville. It talks a lot about the emphasis of pedestrian needs and bicycle needs, as well as the needs of cars in the form of parking. It talks about safety, security, gateways, landmarks, landscaping, streetscape, a lot of great things. But a large component of that plan is the redevelopment aspect. This is a 3D rendering of Aggieville, representing generally what the vision for Aggieville is in terms of development potential. So as you can see, it really kind of keeps the core of Aggieville along Morrow and North Manhattan the same, while really beefing up the edges of Aggieville and capitalizing on underutilized areas. And the way we get these things is through zoning, specifically on the private side of development. As you're also aware, we have an ongoing project in community development called the Unified Development Ordinance. It's basically a wholesale overhaul of our zoning and subdivision regulations in the city, sort of tinkering with the DNA of development in Manhattan. That's a project that started back in spring of 2017, right around the time that we adopted the Aggieville Community Vision. The idea, or part of the zoning standards in Aggieville that we really hoped to achieve in this plan, we sort of banked on getting those changes, integrating them through this process, through the Unified Development Ordinance process. Unfortunately, that project is taking much longer than we had anticipated. Our original timeline for the project was to have it completed last year. That obviously hasn't happened yet. And now the completion date of that project is sort of indefinite right now. Meanwhile, Aggieville continues to move forward. The Tax Increment Financing District is expected to be established in May, just in a couple months. The way that TIF districts work, as you're well aware, is that those first few projects very early on have the most impact on the value of that TIF district. being able to capitalize on them for a longer period of time, over 20 years, once that clock starts. There are also issues with projects that are continually coming in front of us. We've had a couple projects so far, the Aggieville Hotel. Right now we have a proposal going to the planning board on the 18th this month for an apartment building along Bluemont. The parking garage, a proposal on 14th and Laramie. These are projects that we would like to see happen and meet the vision of the plan, but simply can't be done because the zoning doesn't allow it right now. So while we could wait for the Unified Development Ordinance, we don't really have a definite date for when that will be done. So instead of telling these developers to pursue other routes through an expensive and time-consuming PUD process or through exceptions, we are trying to make the changes now so that these projects can get off the ground and start to have the impact on that TIF district. And I want to add that there's other things through the Unified Development Ordinance that we're looking to change in Aggieville, but the things that we're looking at tonight are really those crucial items that will move Aggieville forward. So this isn't the end all tonight. This isn't how Aggieville is going to be for the foreseeable future. It's temporary. The changes we're proposing tonight will be integrated into the UDO pretty seamlessly, but the UDO will go into a bit more detail on certain items, specifically with building design requirements. But for sake of getting these amendments through so that these projects can move forward, especially the parking garage, we're recommending to do those now. So this is a summary of the process we've taken to date. We have effectively started this process, I would say, back in April of 2017 when the plan was adopted. But we started talking about midterm changes, what we're calling the midterm changes to the Aggieville zoning back in June of 2018. As soon as the plan was adopted, we made some pretty short-term changes, which did things like eliminated drive-throughs as a use, added some regulations as to where parking could be located on a site. We eliminated automobile access on Morrow. Those were very quick fixes that needed to be done and were done right away. But we always conceived of these sort of more long-term fixes that needed to be done. And we started having those conversations with Aggieville, with the planning board last summer. They were in the context of the UDO because, like I said, a lot of these things that we're talking about tonight are very similar to those things. So we started having those conversations last summer. As we got into the fall and winter, though, we started to realize that the UDO was going to be taking longer than we had hoped. So we started thinking about how can we make these changes now so that Aggieville can move forward. So we started having meetings with Aggieville businesses and property owners in December of last year. I believe we held 2 separate meetings in Aggieville with those folks. We also launched a survey to businesses and property owners in January to get more input and get a higher level of engagement with those folks. I'll say that we don't normally go to this level of engagement when we're talking about zoning issues, but given the sensitivity of this area and everything that's going on, we really wanted those stakeholders to be involved and to be informed and know what it is that we're doing. So we launched that survey as a part of that. It was pretty successful. We got around 50 replies back, which included business owners and property owners, a few store managers down there as well. We presented all of that and the proposed text amendments to the planning board at a work session a couple of months ago. And then presented a final draft to the planning board last month, who initiated the changes. So I'm going to go over what those proposed text changes are. I have the slide up here to show you exactly the area that we're talking about in terms of where these regulations apply. So the C3 district is in Aggieville, covers that area in red. So anything that we're talking about tonight will only affect that area specifically. So diving right in, we first look at the permitted uses allowed in Aggieville. The only change we're proposing there is to add parking structures as a permitted use. It's obviously something we've been talking about through the Aggieville Community Vision process. The consultant that we hired to do a preliminary design of that garage, we've been talking about garages a lot. It's actually not a permitted use in Aggieville today. It's not explicitly stated. So to avoid issues with that and having to go through a municipal facilities review, which adds time and can get a little messy, we would just add that as a permitted use, as a permitted standalone use in the district, so that we could construct that by right. This was something that has pretty broad support from the community. From our survey done in 2016, 75% of the community supported a garage in Aggieville. Just last year, we found 77%, and of course Aggieville did an internal survey and found that 95% of businesses supported that. It's also been a CIP request from the planning board for a few years.
Ben,
Yes,
can you go back to your picture?
this one?
Yes. So the two highlighted areas, one is where the Marriott's going to put their garage, is that right? Or-
No, so this is Bluemont here on the north.
Okay.
The hotel would be right here. These are, what's highlighted here would be locations for public garages specifically.
Public garages. So the other garage that's going up behind Radina's and for the Marriott, that's already a permitted use?
So the hotel went through the PUD process to get that approved. So yes, they can do it through that special zoning district that they had to apply for.
For the PDU. So this is for two garages then,
The plan talked about,
other than the one with the Marriott?
yeah, the plan talked about two public garages on the edges of Aggieville. These are the locations that we've sort of identified as ideal for those. The one we've been talking about lately, south of Raleigh House, right here, that's where that would go.
And the other one?
That one would be more in the future, once redevelopment started occurring and the capacity for parking became an issue again. We don't really have a timeline on that one, but it would be at least 5 to 10 years out before that would be constructed.
So can't we just permit this particular parking garage and wait for the UDO on the other one, or does it have to be done all together?
Since it's all the same zoning district, it would have to be done together. To apply, uses need to be consistent throughout a zoning district like that.
Okay, because I think in 10 years that might look all different again, so.
Yeah, and we would have total control on both of these garages, really, since this is publicly owned. We're going through that design process right now. The same thing would happen. That same process would occur over here on 11th Street. So we would be in the driver's seat in terms of when that would go in and what it would look like. We're mostly avoiding having to go through a municipal facilities review. As well, that any proposed garage right now would be too tall to be allowed in Aggieville. So we're sort of addressing that issue without having to go through that process by making these zoning amendments.
Ben or Eric, could you speak a little bit? Wouldn't this also apply to any new proposal though for a private garage in allowing them to have the ability to do that? It isn't location specific, is it?
Correct.
Right.
It adds parking garages as a standalone use. Right now, well, with the hotel that went in, it used the PUD for a zoning process, and it included the parking garage. It was integral with the structure of the hotel. But I guess from a land use sense, it would have been considered an accessory use to that hotel anyway. But to answer your question, Ron, if we add tonight through the amendment, parking garages as a standalone use, meaning not accessory to a specific building, and it's most likely going to be public garages that would fall under that. It just adds that as a use.
So it would be a use in any C3 district then?
Yeah, and the only C3 district in the city is Aggieville.
Okay.
And as Ben said, because the public garages, you are the owner of the public garage, the design of those will be fully vetted through the design process, the contract that the city commission would have with the designer of that garage.
Thanks.
I had a slightly different take of this reading ahead. I thought that we can permit the garage or garages in the district. We don't have to site locate. Is that correct?
So the zoning doesn't talk about where garages would go.
Right.
I just have this up here to show you where we're expecting garages to go.
Well, I think to get to Commissioner Reddy's question, which is, why do we need a second garage? Why are we talking about it? All we're doing in this proposal is to authorize a parking structure as part of C3, right?
Yeah,
The other is hypothetical
yeah,
for now.
yeah.
Yeah, Ben, I think if you show even your vision slide, there's lots more in the vision slide than just those two.
Yeah. Right now, we only have 2 public garages identified. The rest could be private or accessory to a building, similar to how the hotel is doing it. So this would just say we can do garages. Parking garages are a permitted use in the district. Right now, they're not. So if the city wanted to construct a private garage, we would have to go through the municipal facilities review process to do it.
And what we're considering tonight is unique and limited to C3 in Aggieville,
Yes,
not C3 anywhere else
this is the only C3 in town.
that we have?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
But it
specifically
is-
for Aggieville.
But this is unique to Aggieville, within this boundary?
Yeah.
Okay.
So building height, this is a pretty critical part of the changes that we're proposing. In the Aggieville Community Vision, it talked about keeping the kind of the historic fabric, the historic intensity of Aggieville relatively the same. So it talked about keeping Morrow and sections of North Manhattan at that 1 to 3 story build out as it is today, whereas along the Bluebond and Anderson corridor, we would like to see up to 3 to 5 stories there, and same with the Laramie corridor, up to 3 to 5 stories there. So as zoning goes, the way this would work out, we've verbally described an area in the core of Aggieville that would be that wouldn't change, that would still have a maximum build out height of 35 feet. This is what that verbal description looks like when drawn on a map. And we have that in the regulations for reference. But everything outside of that dashed line would be allowed to go up to 65 feet and no more than 5 stories. And we would include a minimum build out of 3 stories, so that when development happens, it's not so low intensity as to not make it worth it to really meet that vision of Aggieville. Like I said, we did a survey of Aggieville property owners, business owners, and some store managers were included in that. This was something that was highly supported by that group. Overall, 87% approved of it, 20% of those being property owners, 80% property owners approved of it, 85% business owners, and 100% of managers. So incredible support from the district through that survey is what we found. Building design is something that we wanted to address long-term in Aggieville. Since this text change would really let loose the development potential of that district, we wanted to make sure that we were getting quality development that matched kind of the aesthetic that Aggieville has today. So we're requiring a minimum of 70% brick and or stone on the street-facing facades of buildings. When we talked to Aggieville about that, they were pretty supportive of having a requirement. They supported this in terms of they really wanted to see quality development come out of this effort. So even from property owners, this was highly supported, as you can see by how this is really skewed to the left here. But we really needed to nail down what that percentage was. I said that we're proposing 70%. We presented some examples to sort of illustrate that, what that could look like. We originally pitched 50%, seen on the bottom here, but it was, after seeing the examples, most people supported a more, a higher requirement for that facade cladding. So as far as window area goes, we would have minimum requirements for that. That's an important component to sort of the street, the look and feel of the street, having a lot of windows on the ground floor, matching that sort of window shopping look and feel of Aggieville, while requiring a minimum of, so we would require a minimum of 50% window area on the ground floor. That'd be measured between 2 and 10 feet off the ground. Above that, we would require a minimum of 15% window area. That's pretty standard, especially for residential. That also being kind of a building quality component to those requirements, but also aiding in safety and security of the district, putting more eyes on the street, that kind of thing. So that's an important aspect of the design requirements that we included in this text change. So when we showed these examples to the business owners and the property owners, we use that minimum ratio, that minimum percentage for windows on the ground floor and above that, to sort of play out kind of a worst case scenario, which is why I made this puke green kind of color. What we found though was that in a situation where a developer was proposing going above and beyond that requirement, which we wholeheartedly support for all those reasons I mentioned earlier: aesthetics, security, compatibility with Aggieville. When somebody goes above and beyond that, it is really hard to meet that 70% brick or stone component. This is a rendering for a proposal on 14th and Laramie that's in the Pike right now. The architect, Anderson Knight, contacted me and said that they were looking at our draft regulations and were having issues meeting that requirement with their building because they put so much window in the building, and it really limited their flexibility. And were they to meet that requirement, it would create a pretty monolithic structure, which we didn't really favor. So this is what that looks like from an elevation perspective. All the blue would be window area as we would calculate it. All the gray would be metal, and the red would be brick. So because of that, we are, as staff, recommending what I'm calling a friendly override of the planning board, because we would like to tweak that requirement so that if a developer is proposing a building that has over 50% window area, they would only have to have a 50% brick or stone requirement aside from that. So unfortunately, the planning board already made their recommendation, and we would have to go back to them to change it and not require a supermajority to override them. Instead of doing that, we're recommending this override. Yes.
So it's not that we're overriding them because they voted no against this. We're overriding because they didn't discuss it.
No, they unanimously recommended approval of this. So technically, it's an override on that one specific regulation.
I was so confused about what we were.
Yeah, it looks scary.
Okay.
I
That's
understand.
helpful. Thank you.
So if you are to follow staff's recommendation on that, we would need a supermajority to adopt the regulations as we're recommending, just FYI. So establishment size is another thing that we're changing. Currently, Aggieville has a limit on establishment size of 25,000 square feet. That keeps businesses relatively small with low impact on the district, which works really well in the core of Aggieville. Outside of that, we're proposing to let loose that requirement so that there isn't a maximum to spur on that redevelopment. A good example of that is the hotel on 12th and Bluemont. That was way over the 25,000 square foot maximum that was allowed. So we obviously wanted that development, and it wouldn't have been allowed if we had applied that C3 to it. It wouldn't have been allowed for other reasons due to height, but that would have been a big part of it. So we're proposing to remove the maximum for establishment size, which is just, it's not the building, not the square footage of the total building, but it is by establishment. So someone can redevelop a whole block, which would be upwards of 60,000 square feet, and that would be permitted, but as long as when they subdivided that, no individual store or restaurant was over that 25,000, they would be fine. So we're keeping that maximum for the core of Aggieville. We're moving it outside of that. Something that is sort of a limiting factor in this term is once you hit 25,000 square feet in Aggieville, we slap parking requirements on you for commercial uses. Whereas if you're under that, you don't have a parking requirement. So that's sort of the natural cap that keeps that in check.
So does that zoning limit, I mean, this happens in Aggieville now, a bar owner buys the lots next to them, right? And connects the buildings. That building couldn't be all one name. They would have to stay separate.
Yeah, if they were over 25,000, we would say there is a limit to how much you can combine those because they would be over that establishment size limit.
Are there establishments that are over that size now? There has to be some flirting with it.
To give you a sense of scale, so this is where Kites is in this rectangle. That's a standard ward lot, which is 7,500 square feet. So you'd have to accumulate almost 3 of those to be at this.
So like the John and Cause bomb bar lots are not big enough. Those connected, that's not big enough.
No.
Okay.
Bike parking is something that we're introducing. This is kind of becoming a standard for multifamily development throughout the city. We started applying it back in 2015 with the MFRO overlay update. So this is the standard ratio that we have throughout the city is 1 space for every 2 bedrooms, which equates to 1 rack for every 4 bedrooms because we count these as 2 spaces. This would only apply to developments with 5 or more dwelling units in them. So we wouldn't apply this to loft apartments or anything where that would be pretty hard to make work. So this would mainly affect new developments. They would have to have that requirement. Car parking is something we've revisited. This is something that we as a department are starting to shift on in terms of our approach to parking. We're finding that we would like the minimum to be a minimum. Right now our parking requirements citywide are pretty reflective of what would be the most convenient, not necessarily what's the minimum you need to make your business work. So that's part of the reason we're revisiting this, and that would be reflected through the UDO as well. We're also seeing our parking, the determination of parking as a city to be fairly minimal, and allowing developers more flexibility to determine what would make their project work. And what we're finding as we study this more and more is that we are in fact requiring too much parking from everybody generally. So this is a graph that looks at the US Census Bureau data going back to 2009. This yellow line here represents the rental cohort of Manhattan. This red line represents the rental cohort of the state. This green line represents the owner cohort of Manhattan. This blue line, the owner cohort of Kansas. What this is showing you is the percentage of dwelling units by those cohorts that do not have a vehicle. And as you can see, the percentage of renter dwelling units, specifically in Manhattan, has been increasing since 2009. Now, the flip side of that is when you look at the vehicles per dwelling unit by tenure. So again, yellow is representing the renter. Over the last decade, just about, the number of vehicles owned by renter-occupied houses, renter-occupied households has decreased pretty substantially. And this is U.S. Census Bureau data, so it may be off a little bit, but I want to look at this 1.57, which is where we were at back in 2017, because we did a parking study back in 2015. We looked specifically at the areas around Aggieville, so a very similar demographic of renters that would be in Aggieville, students mostly. Me and my colleagues back in 2015, in February of 2015, we got up very early and counted cars. We drove around this area and counted the cars in the parking lot, counted the cars on the street to see kind of what that natural ratio was for parking in this area. And what we found, it was a very similar ratio to that 1.57. We determined that there were 1.42 to 1.55 cars per dwelling unit in this area. But that's not how our regulations are written, it's by bedroom. So when we translated that to a bedroom count, we found that it equated to 2/3 to about 3/4 of a space per bedroom. Since these numbers are very similar, we feel very confident about the results of that. That being said, for looking at this data, we know that we are way over parking for Aggieville. Currently, the ratio we require is 2 spaces for 1-bedroom units, 3 spaces for 2-bedroom units, 3.5 spaces for 3-bedroom units, and 4 spaces for 4-bedroom units. What we are proposing is a reduction, a very simple reduction, to 1 space per dwelling unit. Originally, because of that data that we showed, we were proposing a 0.75 space per bedroom ratio. Through the Aggieville survey, we quickly found out that that was not something that was desirable from business owners, property owners, and managers down there. So we kind of conceded on that so we changed that ratio to 1 space per bedroom, which again, compared to that sort of natural ratio of 0.75 that we keep finding, is still probably too much, but it's a more palatable reduction in that parking. So this is what it would look like. We'd require a minimum of 1 space per bedroom. We're introducing what we're calling forgiveness of the first 4 units. This is to help support the establishment of more loft apartments in Aggieville, where it's just 1 to 4 units. We're not requiring parking for those units, but anything after 4, we would require 1 space per bedroom. That 1 space per bedroom is a standard in the surrounding zoning districts. That MFRO zoning district, that's the requirement there. This would match that. For commercial parking, we would have no change. Right now, there is no parking requirement for any business under 15,000 square feet. Above that, we slap the requirement on you that is spelled out in our parking chapter of our zoning regulations. And I bring this map up because we kind of freak out when we talk about lowering parking requirements, especially in an area of town that is so sensitive to that, and it's perceived that it's underparked. I'm not really arguing that, but I do want to point out that residential parking that we're looking at does not have to conflict with business-oriented parking. And a good example of that is what we did on Laramie Street, kind of south of Aggieville. Last fall, we changed the rules on those streets. It was unlimited before, and there were people that were living in these apartments that were parking there 24/7. We changed that to 2-hour parking. Those streets are virtually clear now. The residents are parking in their parking lots, and those are open to patrons of Aggieville now. So when we have that parking management strategy in place that controls that long-term parking, this reduction, even if a development were to be under parked, would have a pretty minimal effect on parking in Aggieville in terms of business parking.
So I have a few questions about parking. And I don't freak out about lowering the parking standards. I think in some areas we should eliminate them completely. But, so again, we're only talking in the context of this C3 district still. Like, this isn't a parking philosophy that we're putting everywhere.
That philosophy I mentioned is something that we're looking to through the UDO process. We're looking at it specifically in the context of Aggieville here tonight, though.
How does a public parking garage play into those standards? I think in Aggieville it's maybe a little bit harder to explain, but maybe when you look at like an area like the Seth Child Commons, if we wanted to allow more development to go into that area, so we built a public parking garage, does that help meet some of the parking standards that we put on those businesses, or how does that equate into it?
So the parking requirement is for private on-site parking.
Okay.
So we would not, any garage that we built, we would not count any spaces in that garage toward that requirement that someone would have.
So I guess my worry is, and how do we know that, especially if we build 2 parking garages, let alone 1, that we're just not again overbuilding parking in Aggieville? Like, because we see density increasing down there, which is I thought was a driver of the parking garage, but most of the density hopefully being developed is residential, but we're also going to force the new residential development to build parking spaces as well. So I guess I was wondering, like, what was the feedback that you got that made business owners so hesitant to drop lower than 1?
It was mostly, it was very blunt. It wasn't targeted at a specific reason. Usually it was just parking is an issue down here. Why would we lower the requirement?
I don't like when we make decisions that way. I mean, like, I don't know. To me, it seems like that we're going to build this parking garage and we're still putting parking standards that, in my opinion, should be lower still on these residential businesses. It just seems odd to me, but it's okay.
Yeah, it would just be, so this would just be for the residential component that we would have a requirement. We don't have any requirement for businesses under 15,000 square feet. That wouldn't change through this. I think it's a different question to ask if we would allow that long-term residential parking in a public garage. I don't know if that's the direction we want to go. So
it's just going to give me heartburn 10 years from now to go drive around Aggieville and see a half-full parking garage and a bunch of apartment complexes with huge lots of parking spaces next to them. It's just, so every time I drive to Seth Child Commons, I want to have a heart attack because it's one big parking lot, and I don't want the same thing to happen to Aggie.
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. So I was thinking, if we're going to reduce the parking spaces, because this is so, we are making decisions because of the parking garage, the TIF district and everything is for this parking garage that we keep talking about. But if we're going to reduce the parking spaces in the residential areas, are we trying to modify behavior? Because I think there's a lot more students coming in with fewer vehicles for a variety of reasons.
And that graph would show that, yeah.
Yeah. So, and right now what I keep hearing is we have a parking problem. But if they're coming in with fewer vehicles and you are anticipating, well, we only need a fewer amount of spaces for these, for the vehicles, what is the parking garage? Are we, you know, it's kind of around the same reference. Are we overbuilding if we're already thinking we already have too much and we're going to be decreasing it? What are we utilizing this garage for? Just for, I don't know, other than, we can say just for businesses, but the businesses that are under a certain square footage don't even have to worry about parking, how many parking spaces they have. So I'm a little
Commissioner, let me just add something. One, we've been talking, most of our discussion so far has been talking about the residential component, and Commissioner McKee, that is part of it, but a lot of the densification that the Aggieville community vision is showing is not residential. It's retail, it's offices, it's maybe cultural, arts types of things. And we've heard, and Jason can bear this out, that the developers that are interested in coming into Aggieville to do large redevelopment projects are expecting parking. And that's what the parking garage is going to help serve, as well as the existing retailers that are in Aggieville to provide the parking for that gap. That, and Jason, I'm forgetting what the number is in the study right now. Our deficit in Aggieville is
600 spaces or so.
Yeah, and so that's the intent of this first parking garage. We're not going to go build the second parking garage if there isn't a demand for it. But that first parking garage is a key component in facilitating redevelopment and reinvestment in these areas that we're showing for the higher, the higher density, the 3 to 5 story along the Bluemont-Anderson corridor and along the Laramie corridor. Without that parking garage, you probably are not going to see very much redevelopment going into play.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I almost feel as though we're getting rid of what was maybe what may not have been an extreme problem that we're thinking, but because we have taken out the garage for the Marriott, and now we're taking out more parking spaces away because we don't feel they need them as much. I'm hearing two different scenarios for the parking garage. I understand the speak about parking garage and that investors and businesses that want to come in are talking about the parking garage, but I also see us reducing a lot of parking spaces that we initially had. It seems as though we may not have had the extreme parking problems that we think that we had, and we're manifesting it into this garage, hoping that a lot more businesses come in because that's what our focus point is. I don't know if that made sense, but that's what I'm thinking.
See, I agree with the proposal. It makes sense to me. The statistics there essentially show that if you build a new apartment, because the existing ones are under the old regulations, so the parking places are there. So if you build a loft apartment and people are going to bring a bicycle, then we don't need to put as much space there. So I think that adjusting it a little bit, and I agree with the business owners, I wouldn't have gone below 1. Just seems to be against what we were doing. But I also understand the parking garage is basically designed to create business flow, as I call it. Because people want to park, go in, buy something, be there for an hour, leave, and it's got to be more of a convenience factor. And so that's why there's got to be some extra space there. And so I separate those two entirely. If somebody builds loft apartments, we don't want them parking on the street. So there's got to be a requirement for them to have some parking. And also that long-range vision was really pushing more for office space and retail space and not apartment complexes. So I don't see, huge apartment complexes going in there, but you addressed what would probably happen would be some more loft apartments. And there needs to be a little bit of parking addressed there. So I think it's a good fit.
Well, let me amend my comments by saying I just don't like minimum parking standards in districts like this, regardless of residential or businesses. Some of the most innovative districts in the country have eliminated parking standards, and mass chaos has not ensued. Businesses have not closed. They found success in it. It's a progressive, forward way of thinking that many cities are taking on right now. So I just want to make sure I state that. I don't think it works everywhere, but I think in a district like Aggieville, we should be more aggressive about those parking standards. I don't want to see a big district full of parking spaces 10 years from now. And I think we're slightly moving into the right direction, but I think that we could push a little bit harder. And that was generally the point that I was.
So that's really all I had. This is just a summary of the changes that we've talked about. I will mention that there's a few what we're calling miscellaneous and non-substantive changes in this draft that we've proposed, mostly relating to cleaning up language, removing regulation that doesn't apply anymore or is covered in another section, just to kind of clean it up. Again, there's no substantial, no concrete changes that are associated with those. It's just sort of a regulatory cleanup. If you have any questions on those, I'd be happy to answer them, but they're very minor. And that's all I have. Are there any additional questions for me?
I say, I am concerned about the UDO. If they were supposed to be done last year and they're going to be taking, it seems like there isn't really a deadline. I've heard speak about maybe coming back to us in the summer and the modules going up and the website and all of this. How much are we paying to the consultant, and what is our expectation at this point from the UDO? Because we are making changes already without UDO getting back to us. Some of my thoughts were that the UDO was going to simplify the process as far as issues such as this. But since we're moving ahead, regardless, I just want to know what the process is with the UDO.
Ben, let me answer that for you. We're, just to kind of give you an update on where we're at, we just recently, within the last week or two, got the first kind of final draft of all three components of the UDO. We broke it up into what we're calling 3 modules because it was such a big document. So we've just recently gotten the whole document back, and we're starting our first full detailed proofreading cover to cover on it. The reason it's taken a long time is because we're making a lot of modifications to what the consultant was giving us, because we wanted it to be more for Manhattan and not just any other city. And so we're doing quite a bit of revising of what we've been getting to make sure it's what Manhattan wants. And it's taking a long time because of that. And again, the reason we're coming to you tonight is we don't want to hold up some developments that are fully in compliance with what the Aggieville vision, which has been adopted by the Commission and the Planning Board. Those developments are fully in compliance with that. We're trying to do this midterm C3 text changes to facilitate that development. The changes you're looking at tonight will be fully incorporated into the UDO, into that Aggieville section of the UDO, with some additional detail on some building design and entry areas into Aggieville, kind of the iconic landmark entrance areas and things, which is just way too much detail to do tonight as a midterm change. But as you said, we're hoping that by summertime we can get the UDO in front of the Planning Board and the Commission for public hearings. We are in the process of creating a schedule for public engagement. While we're doing the proofreading, we're also going to start going back out both to the steering committee and the various stakeholders in the community to start educating them about the UDO, because it's to be honest, it's part of the reason it's taken so long is it's apples and oranges. The zoning regulations that we have now were really written in 1965, and we've done internal updates of them ever since then. This is the first time that the planning department has ever hired a consultant to write regulations. In the entire time I've been here for 35 years, this is the first time we've hired a consultant to do that. And so it's just it's different than doing comprehensive plans and things, because it's such a highly detailed level of work. It just takes a long time.
I understand it's going to be pretty complex, but it's also going to take us a long time to read through that. By the time any kind of revisions happen, it will probably be 2020 by the time anything really finalizes. But in the interim, I think we're going to have more PUDs and more small
exceptions and-
projects or anything of this sort coming. I mean, within a year span, I can see a few more projects coming our way. So I just want to be careful with both of the expectations, I guess, because I don't know what to expect from the UDO, but I also I don't want to just make decisions.
And again, what's driving these changes is that the Aggieville Vision Plan, which is, the higher level guide that has been adopted by the Planning Board and City Commission. So these aren't just random decisions. We're basing all of these on that Aggieville Vision Plan, so.
Right. This is just one thing I'm talking about, because we made PDU changes even with Stonehaven. We did PDU modifications with several other, I can't think of them right now, but zoning conditional uses and things of that sort, the non-conforming part that keeps coming up consistently. I just want to know where we were in the process. I understand it's very complex, but I just want to make sure that it's still on our radar, and it's going to take we might have new commissioners next time too. It's going to take us a while to get through all of that.
So in reality, though, we can say that by doing this, we're still in alignment with the UDO. You're just getting a little bit ahead of the game in one small sector of the city. And that would be what my expectation would be if somebody else wants to change a PUD, that the staff makes certain it's in alignment with what you envision the final product being, and that's why I don't have a problem with it.
Anything else from me?
Let's go back to the discussion we had about the percent of brick and stone.
Yeah.
When we first started talking about this was relative to the first floor. If you've got a 65-foot building, what are the thoughts about that ratio then? Is it the same?
So we would require 70% across the board, 70% brick or stone, anything that wasn't made up of glass or a door. But in those cases where we have a building that is far exceeding that minimum requirement for windows that we have, which we, again, would like to encourage, we're changing their brick or stone requirement to 50% to give them a better mix of materials and give them more flexibility in their design so that we don't have kind of a monolith building that goes up.
I want to make sure I'm clear on the language. So if I've got a building that's, let's say 65% glass, does that mean that I need to have 70% or whatever you come up with, 50% of the remainder in stone or brick?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that's not glass has to be stone or brick.
Yeah, I think we need, when you talk about coverage, you need to make sure that you've subtracted the glass first.
Yeah.
So
that's part of that calculation.
Make it clear, yeah.
One more question. In the minutes from the planning board, there was talk about the garage and fees, and we may not need to discuss that right now, but in the future, when we do start talking about the garage, we need to address that a little bit more clearly. I know tonight we're just talking about zoning amendments, but I'm kind of confused about some of the conversation as far as it might be paid for during the daytime and free at night. That's not something I've heard in the past. So I think, I don't know if this is the time to have that discussion, but that's something we need to consider when we're talking about some of these things.
I don't think it applies to tonight, but it's certainly something as we develop a parking management plan for Aggieville and the rules and regs and what is going to be the revenue stream in that parking garage and how much debt support is it going to play and how much of the O&M is it going to play. It will certainly be a key discussion topic. And there are no provisions that have been really discussed or agreed to.
At that time, it would be great to see, I don't know how you can manage this, but, you know, we talked about garages in Lawrence, but we also have the K-State parking garage here. How are they doing on their, you know, how their revenue source from the parking garage?
This is as good a time as any. I've been waiting till we get to the right point. I know that we're down 4,000 students at K-State. So what we see today is not what we encountered 3 or 4 years ago either. And if we were implementing something like this, it would be easier now than then. I am willing to accept all of the recommendations you have. The one parking place per unit is a kind of minimum for me. I look at this parking management as an issue, though, because we're implementing pieces of it with the promise that on down the way we'll solve this, that, or the other. And we're not talking about those things as we go or here at the beginning. And I have tried to raise the flag as often as I can about the impact on City Park of the parking that we're going to be pushing over there. And I think that we just keep pushing people to City Park for parking, obviously. And I don't know if that parking, this parking management plan is always pretty nebulous. We don't see it yet anyway, but I do see the parking in Aggieville or in the City Park. And that's the piece that I want to be sure that we pay attention to also. Aggieville is Aggieville, but it's not, the City Park just isn't the parking lot for Aggieville. It's the park for the citizens. And so whether you see a car there or not, and we see a lot of cars there now, we also see party buses. And I, for one, would like to do something about that, the party bus business. The oversized vehicles taking up multiple parking places is just not acceptable. So that's my pitch for today.
Okay, well, this would be the time to call for public comment. So anyone having some thoughts, ideas, suggestions on this plan that's been presented by Aggieville? You don't have to motion Ryan to come, you know.
Well, if you've sat through this whole thing, you might as well say something.
Ryan Bramhall, I'm the president of Aggieville Business Association. We do strongly support what the city's doing with this vision, or with the zoning. We hear this all the time, the parking issue, like you were talking earlier. Something that we don't take in consideration, and we didn't either as an association. When we took Laramie and made that 2 hours, we didn't realize who all actually parked there. There was a lot of people that work in Aggieville that park there, plus there's some people above, Kites that live. But the main problem is what we figured out was where are our employees parking, because we took Laramie. So we got with Jason, asked him some questions, and figured out some places towards the park, not at the park, but going down those side streets. Something we're working on in the district is try to figure out how many people actually park in Aggieville. I have 50 employees that come to work, usually on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and every one of them drive. None of them walk. Well, I could say I have one person that walks. They live across the street. But also when we're looking at it too, it's just not people that live in Aggieville. It's a destination. We're still a rural community. So we have people on the weekends during the week that drive in to eat, shop. So that's something we do need to consider. But the one person per bedroom, I think we can 100% support that, and that's what we got from that study we did. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Get some rest after fake St. Patty's?
Oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. Dennis Cook, I'm the director for the Aggieville Business Association. Exactly what Ryan was saying. We are very supportive of this. In answer on the question on some of that parking garage, our vision is after this is we get into that streetscape. And when we get into the streetscape, we're looking at, nothing's been decided completely, but you take that Morrow Street and either getting rid of diagonal parking or you get rid of parallel parking. So the idea is to bring those sidewalks out, make that more of a destination area, but when you do that, you lose more parking. That vision of getting rid of all those cars right down the street and having people walking and shopping and doing things, that's part of that parking garage. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it. Any other public comment? All right, we'll close public comment. Just have kind of one comment here for the staff. I think we've talked about this before, but Commissioner Morris raised it. As we go through this construction of the hotel and the rest of construction, I think it's probably valuable to have a session on kind of how we see this playing out, because we've made some concessions already. We put 2-hour parking out there, and we know that we're going to have some places for people to park while the construction's going on. So some kind of a timeline that kind of leads us into the construction of the parking garage, and then on the parking garage itself, perhaps some kind of a concession plan for those people who work in Aggieville so that they're not paying the full term. In other words, they get a daily rate that's far less than having to pay for 6 hours or 8 hours of parking. Things like that just kind of give us a look ahead on not only how we handle the parking in general around Aggieville and the top of the park, but also the financing that might go with that to contribute to the payment of the garage. Similar to, I think, what we did out, the little study we did for the airport.
Try not to get into too much detail, but there's 2 initiatives going on right now. Mark Bechamp with Olson has met with city staff. We've looked at a scope and a fee that would involve the garage and Laramie Street, as well as 12th Street between Bluemont and Morrow. Both those scopes and those fees bring in a number of consultants. On the parking garage side, Walker, who did the parking analysis for us out at the airport, still involved and will help us put together a parking management plan, not only for the garage, but for the district. And it does impact City Park, Commissioner Morris, it does. And we clearly have people push there today. And as we get into more construction projects, we're gonna push even more people. And it's going to impact not only the district, but the surrounding area. But ultimately, trying to get to that plan that accommodates the parking adequately for the district itself. So the hotel, finishing up design, finishing up land acquisition, should be under construction sometime this summer. They want to open by August of 2020. We would like to have 12th Street with the water line and the redevelopment by way of streetscape, landscape, and street done as well between Bluemont and Morrow by August of 2020. So you'll see some of that design work start, and with that design work comes a lot of communication and a lot of options and a financing back before you all to consider.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. Okay, further comments? All right, entertain a motion. I think the motion in it has the part on the planning board too.
I can make the motion, but I just want to make clear that, it says override, but it's not really overriding anything except the facade material, which is the mix between glass and brick. So it's not like we're disapproving what the planning board did. I appreciate their work. This is just a minor adjustment, but due to the administrative nature, it has to be read as an override. So I'll make the motion that we override the recommendation of the Manhattan Urban Area Planning Board and approve first reading of an ordinance amending Article 4, Section 4-203, C3, Aggieville Business District of the Manhattan zoning regulations dated February 27th, 2019 as proposed, based on the findings in the staff report.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Now we'll move to item H, which was pulled from the consent agenda onto the last of the general agenda. And would you like someone to, would you like to speak first? or-
Could we get
Yeah.
Brad just to give a
Yeah.
brief overview of the request?
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. The request that we have here tonight is to waive the building permit fees for the bond-related school construction projects for the duration of that construction schedule. The bond projects that were approved in the November 2018 election. We have done this twice before, 1993, when I think it was the 2 new middle schools, in 2008 most recently. Part of the process was the fact that the school district would also accept our updated local codes in their entirety to be used during that construction process. So the specific item you have though here tonight is really just to waive or the request to waive the building permit fees for these projects. Would be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, what I wanted to highlight, I know you did an estimate here because you don't really know till you get the actual building things, but you know, somewhere between $290,000, $300,000 in fees. Now, my understanding is, of course, those fees help finance what your office does. So you're not doing the work for free. Okay, so what happens? You know, are we going to have to hire more people?
No.
Are you going to work your people harder, overtime? What's the impact on the office?
Yeah, it's a good question, Commissioner. You know, when we've done, again, drawing on experience from past projects such as this, you know, it's, I guess the way we look at it, it's construction in town. It's construction that we would otherwise be permitting and inspecting. You know, how busy we are in a given year with other projects weighs into that as well. Consider that the span of this, of all of these projects is several years. And so it does raise our inspection numbers in a given year during the peak of the construction. But we really feel strongly that it's something that that's important, and that these structures meet our local codes and that they're inspected so that we can make sure of that. We don't feel that we're going to need to hire any additional inspectors to cover these. We haven't in the past when there's been school bond projects, so you know, it will be additional inspections, there's no doubt about that, but it's that way with really any other construction projects that we permit and inspect as well.
Can you say just something for Commissioner Butler on the difference between maybe the recency of our codes and that of the state?
Sure, yeah, the city of Manhattan, we have been we are very regular at updating our codes. We make sure we have the most current construction codes that there are. In fact, we'll be bringing those to you in June this year to update those again. The state statute that actually regulates school construction lists a particular set of codes that are used in school construction. Now, those can be updated by the state fire marshal's office, but the ones that are listed in the state statute are quite old. They're in some cases about 5 editions older than the 2000, for instance, is one of them. 1999 is another one. So the state really hasn't updated those statutes to keep up with those construction codes. And so part of this whole thing is, even though the state fire marshal's office will update those codes occasionally, it's not the full package of codes that we would use here in town. What the statute notes does not include several of the codes that we use here locally. So it's a much smoother, much cleaner process if we can just apply what we have locally. It's the most up-to-date and the most comprehensive package of codes there are.
Other than ours being more up to date, I mean, you said it's really important. So what are some of those advantages of them following our codes rather than the state's?
I think some of the things that you look at when you look at the updated codes are things like the recognition of new materials. That's one of the reasons codes update regularly is because of new materials that are out almost monthly sometimes, construction methods and practices, things we learn from past disasters and past incidents that all go into those codes being updated to make buildings safer. And really, now some of the new codes can actually help with the cost efficiency of some of these projects too, because of some of the newer types of materials and methods that they allow. So you could take an older code that doesn't recognize any of that new type of construction and wind up with a more expensive project than you could under a newer code that maybe allows for some of that type of thing.
So you think you can confidently say that following our codes will make the building safer for the students that are in it, and as well as our emergency personnel that might have to work in it?
I would absolutely say that for the students, the staff, the parents that might be in there, and also for our first responders that may or may not have to be in those buildings as well. Part of the codes are for their safety as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
There's just a couple of points. I think I talked with Ron about this earlier, but part of this is partnership. Part of it is the taxpayers have to pay, regardless if it's out of the USD 383 or ours. So, you know, it's kind of a wash there. We certainly don't want to run up any more bills there. And then the other one is, part of this partnership was that we have rec centers located on their property, and we both benefit from those kind of partnerships. So this is a little bit unusual, but as you said, we've done it a couple times before. So I kind of view this as part of the partnerships that we execute both with the USD and with KSU and others.
Yeah, Mayor, and I would just add to that, again, having experienced this twice before since I've been here, I would compliment the school district on their cooperation with us during both of those projects, both of those sets of projects.
So, yeah, I was kind of ambivalent to this as well, mainly because we tend to give waivers often. I'm not just saying to the school district, and maybe often is not the right word, but we have given waivers for permit fees, for nonprofits and for other organizations, and that's still taxpayer money. It's not coming from, we're not a corporation, so it's not coming from some other revenue source. So either way, it's from a different taxing authority, but it's still taxpayer money. So when there's grants written by nonprofits, or if it's a $130 million bond, I hope the fees for permits or any kind of inspections is included in those types of revenue sources, let's say. Because if the bond is approved for $130 million, I hope there was a line item for permits and fees and inspections. If there's grants by nonprofits or other organizations, I hope there's a line item that they might need to pay the city this much money. Because even if we waive it, it's still taxpayer money that it's coming out of. And that's taking your professionals away from somebody else that's actually paying for it out of their pocket. So that's my only concern. I think one of the things, you know, when we start talking about the budget, I brought it up before, there's lots of sales tax exemptions given to nonprofits, to government agencies, a variety of people, millions and billions of dollars. There's property tax exemptions given to a variety of people that live within Manhattan that don't have to pay. So the bulk of that taxes fall on your low income and middle income residents, and they don't have a place to go. Even if they buy a house in a benefit district, that's adding thousands of dollars that they can't write off somewhere else. So I hope in the future, well-intentioned, I think we rely on our good faith and good partnerships. I think that goes without saying. That's why we get along well with each other. but maybe we need to look at some kind of a policy where we pay 50%. Or maybe we need to look at some guidelines on when do we waive this? Or is it just across the board if you're, some entity that we trust and we're just gonna waive your fees? Because you're gonna use your staff to meet other people's needs at the same time. So I'm not saying this is ill-warranted. I can see it, but I hope it was there in the under $30 million that was asked for also by citizens at the same time.
Let me just clarify what I was saying, because I may not have been too clear, but what we do is forego fees. USD therefore does not have to charge something else, which means taxpayers are paying for it. Oh, yeah, no, that's clear. I'm just talking about this specific one.
Brad, I'd like to ask you, someone, Ron, has developed, or Scott, I guess, has developed an estimate of the amount associated with waiving the building permit fees. Right. Have you also developed an estimate for the cost of your inspection fees?
No, we haven't yet, Commissioner. That's until we actually see those building plans and see what the exact scope of those projects are. I know, we've seen them in a very broad sense, but that's pretty hard to do until we actually go through those and determine what we're going to need to look at and not. We could do that, I think, but it would probably be pretty ballpark, very.
Given that lack of detail, I think I would like for you to make a project of when this is over. I would like an estimate of what the code office's costs are for the inspections. Okay. Because it's going to be higher than the permit fees. And so, anyway, just because, I mean, I think it's in hindsight thing. So maybe you need a special account, Bernie.
And Commissioner, just to add to that, and one of the things we'll do in June when we come to you with our code updates for our construction codes is we analyze our permit fees every time we do that, every 3 years, and we look at the fees we generate as opposed to our division's budget and what our expenditures are, and we make sure that we're staying in that basic area of collecting fees that pay for a service. And generally speaking, over the years, we have been in that range. So I think it's, we try to not raise those when we don't have to, and we compare ourselves to other cities to make sure that our fees aren't out of line with others.
I would just like for us to be able to know what we're committing to. And while we have the permit fee total, we don't have the code inspection total. So we don't even know what we're committing. So, and that's why I'd like for it to be tracked somehow. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to just make some other comments as I thought through this. Initially it looked like to me, fine, it's a good idea, but of course the USD boundaries do not coincide with the city boundaries. So you're not going to be inspecting buildings that are built in the USD outside the city limits. Okay, the other thing that came to mind, and maybe it's just implied, that if we don't waiver it, that's why we had the discussion on the state fire marshal. If we don't waiver this, then the school board uses a lower standard, but their justification for us wavering is they're concerned about the safety of the students. What standard are they going to use in the other part of the USD? And I know you can't answer that, so don't. But these are just the thoughts that went through my mind, and the taxpayers of USD 383 voted in this bond to construct the buildings, not the citizens of Manhattan. There's a fine difference there. I know a lot of us are in the USD, but so what's happening is we're taking about $300,000 of the cost, and it becomes a hidden tax on the citizens of Manhattan, because the bond issue said we're voting $129.5 million to construct. And as Commissioner Reddy said, to construct means permits. Right, and that's what got me thinking, I'm not sure I like this. I'm not in favor of waivers on just about anything when it comes to utility hookups or the rest. And so that troubled me, and I thought about the rec center and the great partnership we have, for the middle schools. But the difference to me there is, that's all citizens of Manhattan. That's our rec center, it's in the city limits, and it's a good partnership. And,
No, it's also, the operational cost is also.
Yeah. And so that's what caused me to, to separate those two. And it just appears to me to be a hidden tax. And we get briefings, beginning of the budget, and it's a case of, building permits are down. Got to raise the mill levy. Let's go ahead and have a sales tax, to make ends meet. And then we turn around and waive $300,000. And then we talked about waiving another one on another project that's going to come up. And so, this probably pass anyway, but to go with what Commissioner Morris said, be interesting when you do that report, is make a list of all the stuff the commission's bothered to waive, so we can see, what impact that has on the building thing. But I'm not going to support this, simply because I do see it as a hidden tax, and it's a USD issue, not a citizen of Manhattan issue, from that standpoint. And so there's a number of people that contacted me on that, and they said it just doesn't make sense because the $129.5 million should have included this, and that is going to translate into about a $7.5 million increase on everybody's taxes. And so this just makes it higher, and that's what my issue is.
I have a question, Ron. For the, if you know this, for the Ogden and the Blue Township Elementary, are they asking those municipalities to waive their fees as well?
I don't know, maybe when public comments come, Eric can address that.
If you could, answer that. Because, if they're asking to waive the fees as well, and then all of us waive the fees, then it is a wash, right? Because, it just moved down a step. Now, I think Commissioner Butler's comments make sense if Ogden or Potawatomi County decided not to waive their fees. Then I think that comment, that assessment holds some validity. So if both of those jurisdictions agreed to waive their fees as well, it's a wash. So like the Blue Township, how does that, is that just state?
So
The
I'm
state's
just
gonna
trying to
expect
think,
that?
Potawatomi County doesn't have a building permit, do they?
They do.
Oh, they do?
They do issue permits. Their fees are considerably less because they don't have any inspections. They don't really have any cost because there's, once they issue the permit, there's really nothing else that happens after that.
Right now they don't.
Ogden does, but I'm not sure I could tell you what theirs are, especially related to a project like this, but,
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
I think that speaks to equity, but that's a whole different topic. Because if Manhattan has codes and two other areas don't have codes, or different types of codes, and you're following, I don't think the state ones, I don't know what is safe and unsafe. I don't know when it comes to schools, because I work at Ogden, and to me, it seems like a safe school as far as the structure is concerned. But I don't know what the difference is between ours here and there. I don't go into the pipes and all of that other stuff either.
Sure. If I could jump in real quick, one of the things that I want to make sure you're aware, for any school, the state fire marshal's responsible for the inspections. And anything that happens in the city, we have an agreement with the state that we will do their inspections for them within the city of Manhattan. So the school that's in Blue Township or the school in Ogden, those are inspected by state fire inspectors. What Brad was getting at is our inspectors would inspect not only the items that the state requires, but the additional items that we have as a city. So either way, they would get inspected. It's just to what level of inspection would they be?
And so either way, there's staff cost no matter what. The staff cost is the same. We'll be inspecting those buildings. It's just a matter of which book we're looking at when we do it.
Right, and the state obviously would just take that on as part of their normal inspections. They don't charge a fee to the school districts for providing those inspections.
In the out-of-city limit schools.
But what I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, right? The ones that are within the city of Manhattan, even if we don't waive these fees, we're still the ones inspecting it. We're just doing it from the state code. And the state's not reimbursing us for those so either way, we're in those buildings.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Yes.
But holding them accountable to different standards,
Yes,
not City of
correct.
Manhattan standards,
That's
so.
correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. Because it's the fire department, the Riley County Fire Department, whatever it might be.
Okay, well, let's call for public comment. Eric, would you like to come up?
Thank you, Commission, for addressing this, and I'd like to thank the staff from the City of Manhattan. They've been absolutely phenomenal to work with on this. Like I said, as Brad mentioned, you know, this was brought up 2 times. This is not us bringing it to you originally. This has been the past practice that we've had as far as requesting the fee waiver that's been done within the city. Now, I realize it might not be 6 figures, but the district has also tried to take steps when we've had fees that could have come our way, BU, through most of the time through easements, where you need to temporary easements in our property. We've waived those fees, and every time I do that, along the way, I have to put in my board packet, and I have a little statement on there that said this is to reciprocate the blessing that the city's been to us throughout the fee process and the last bond issue. To be able to do that, we continue to pass that on. Mayor Dodson, I think you kind of echo the comments of trying to work together. The partnerships we have are extremely valuable. And while we can take that money and we can build it and we can permit it and we can do those things. Usually I don't want to get into safe, unsafe. The phrase I use is safe and safer. So we want to build them to the safest level we possibly can. We want to put ourselves under those guidelines. We want that standard, but allowing us to do that and save that money inside allows us to put more in those projects, which is more value for your community overall. If we're having to divert funds to that, it's totally possible, and we can do that. And yes, we would request waivers from the other entities that are required along the way. Not knowing whether we'll get them or not, because we don't have that standing pattern that we've had with the City of Manhattan. So, you know, I'll stand for questions now if you guys have any. I'd be happy to answer, but.
Well, I just want to say this isn't about being anti-waiver. It's just the compilation of all of them together, not just USD 383. Over a period of a year, we have given so many waivers to so many organizations that it ends up being a lot of money. Yeah. And so when I look at it, it's all good faith. It's all about partnerships, but somebody's paying that bill.
It is.
And I think my hesitation is if somebody's asking for a grant, that's taxpayer money again. But if they're exempting it, if we're exempting it, then we're paying it again. So some of our residents are paying twice for the same function that they should have gotten in some of those areas. And that's what I mean by the bond issue. So I think when taxpayers approve it, that's probably hopefully already in there, so we're not trying to waive something just because it's been done, or that's just good-natured how we need to do it. As far as the partnerships, that's going to continue. I think in a community like ours, we all work together to make it a successful community. But this is just one small part where it builds and builds and builds, and we're out like $2 million if we add up all of the fees that we waived across the board because there are good organizations or whatever else it might be. I'm just trying to see if there's a different way we can handle it, from sales tax exemptions, from property tax exemptions to waiving fees, because we're always in the red, and I'm trying to get away from being so dark in the red. So.
And I understand that, and I understand we're one piece of that puzzle that's a bigger puzzle than just us.
I'll just ask the question, were the building fees, because the assumption is they were built into the cost of the bond?
They're always built into cost of construction, but what this allows us to do is divert that to something more productive, something more tangible, something more visible, better project.
Okay, so it's increasing the value of the bond
in some capacities.
To 129.7 instead of 5, basically, or 8, depending on what the value of the building permits are. Okay.
Any other questions? I appreciate it very much. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Eric.
Just want to ask Ron one other question, or maybe Brad, because when I call this a hidden tax on that amount, maybe that's not entirely true based on what you said. In other words, can you actually do this so that it has no impact on the taxpayers?
Well, I would submit that, for the cost of the inspection, we're bearing that cost anyway. So there's no extra cost. It's an opportunity cost of other inspections they'd be doing if they weren't adding these into the mix. So, but at the same time, there's a differential there in that it's a public partner entity that we're partnering with and agreeing to exempt their fees. The relationship with the state fire marshals is unique. That doesn't really apply to anybody else. So that relationship is something we would bear anyway. To me, it's this situation where it takes, let's just say it's $300,000 that they are using to pay us for a permit fee that maybe they can put into some kind of improvement in the building. I don't think it inflates their bond any. They just get to use that money somewhere else and make a project better.
Yeah, it depends on how you slice it. I just, I just don't want to, do a waiver and then get told, okay, we got to hire an extra person in the code office. We can't do the, the requested rental inspections because we don't have enough guys to do it. Somebody calls in. That's the impact I'm concerned about.
Yeah, staff has not raised that issue. It wasn't an issue last time, and there was
the one thing I would add,
nearly as much construction.
Right. What we'll end up doing on a project like this is our exempt staff that is normally in the office dealing with other issues will go out and do more inspections than normal. When we talk about rental and all, that's a different group of people. So those people don't do the same jobs. And yeah, what it'll do is take away a little bit of office time, some training opportunities possibly throughout this year. And instead of doing classroom training type of things, they'll be out in the field getting practical training and experience doing that. Also, these projects, usually we dedicate a person if it's a larger project where the efficiency is gained by them staying on site and doing multiple inspections rather than going from one address to another address. And so we just make adjustments to make it work. I promise we won't come to you and ask for staffing because of this issue.
Yeah, I'd hate to have us get into ledger keeping on this too, because as Eric said, they grant us easements when we could be charged, and so this is just kind of a little bit of getting along over the long run, I think. But I'm not quite sure how we do
we just make a motion off the consent? Okay.
What?
Okay, I'll make the motion. I move we approve the request from Manhattan Ogden USD 383 to conduct plan review and inspections of the school district bond projects, but waive associated building permit fees.
I'll second.
You call the roll, please.
Commissioner McKee?
Yes.
Commissioner Morse?
I'm voting yes. I want to err on the side of the most safe and the most safe conditions. We have rental issues here in this community where we don't even inspect properties. So to me, this is an important something for the children in this and the safety of our schools. So even though I still want to know how much it's going to cost. Thank you.
Mayor Dodson?
Yes.
Commissioner Reddy?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
All right, staff convinced me you're not going to raise my mill levy because of this, so yes.
Okay, great discussion, appreciate it. No further items, so we stand adjourned. Thank you.